Some of you may have heard about this. Many of you probably haven't. As has become the trend, mainstream media isn't covering what's really happening in the United States. So we have to. This week, federal agents stormed an apartment building on South Shore Drive in Chicago while most families were asleep. Helicopters circled overhead as officers rappelled down the facade. Flashbang grenades rattled windows and shook the walls. Families were pulled from their beds, zip-tied, and forced outside barefoot into the cold. Children were crying out in confusion, some of them still wearing pajamas, others nude, while adults stood nearby. Some of those detained were United States citizens. Most of them were held without charges. The Department of Homeland Security attributed the operation to Operation Midway Blitz, stating the building was being used by members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. But immigrants' rights groups, local attorneys, and community members have challenged that narrative, raising concerns about the scale of the raid and the treatment of those inside, especially the children. What happened in Chicago this past week wasn't law enforcement. It was state-sanctioned terror carried out in the middle of the night. If this feels like a break from who we are, it's not. It's a continuation of something much older, a pattern we've seen play out again and again in American history. Back in 1919, not long after World War I, the country was really on edge. Fear of labor strikes, immigrants, and anything labeled radical was spreading fast, and that fear was used as fuel. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, he ordered federal agents to raid homes, union halls, and immigrant neighborhoods across the country. Thousands of people were arrested within weeks. There were no warrants, no formal charges, no court hearings. People were beaten, denied lawyers, and often deported simply for being labeled radical aliens. That wasn't about safety. It was about control, about making sure people knew who held the power. 2 decades later, in 1942, the United States responded to the attack on Pearl Harbor not just with war abroad, but with fear at home. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly removed from their homes and sent to prison camps in remote areas of the country. 2/3 of them were U.S. citizens. They were given 48 hours to pack. Families were watched by armed guards as they left behind businesses, homes, communities, everything. There were no trials, no accusations, just ancestry. Years later, long after the damage had been done, the U.S. government finally admitted what people had said all along, that the internment camps during World War II were driven by fear and racism, not by any real threat to national security. And yet here we are again in 2025, watching children in Chicago dragged from their beds for who they are, not what they've done. In that same city, Chicago, another name lives in the shadows of American policing: Fred Hampton. In 1969, Hampton was a 21-year-old leader of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. He was charismatic, brilliant, and he had the rare ability to unify people across lines of race and class, and that made him dangerous in the eyes of the FBI. So, in the early hours of December 4th, local police, working in coordination with federal agencies, raided his apartment. Raided it. Nearly 100 bullets were fired, and Fred Hampton was shot dead while he slept. His fiancée, 8 months pregnant, was dragged from the room at gunpoint. That raid was framed as law enforcement, but it wasn't about stopping crime. It was about silencing someone who dared to organize and speak out against injustice. Someone who dared to lead. The echoes of that morning, they live on in the tactics and the fear, and now in South Shore Drive. We also can't forget the longer shadow that stretches behind all of this: Jim Crow. For generations, Black families in the South lived with the constant threat of police violence, not just in public, but in their own homes. Sheriffs could storm in at night, haul people off on false charges, or deliver them straight into forced labor camps under the banner of chain gangs. The prison industrial complex at work. The Constitution offered no protection. The Fourth Amendment, the one that guards against unreasonable searches and seizures, meant nothing if you were Black in America. And when I look at those Chicago families pulled from their homes, treated as disposable, I see that legacy resurfacing, just directed toward a different group. And now in 2025, it's happening again. Chicago isn't an exception, it's a continuation. And if you think that sounds too extreme, if you're wondering whether the comparison to authoritarian regimes goes too far, I want to remind you of one more name, Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. That's what the Nazis called their secret raids. They would arrive without warning in the dead of night and take people away. Writers, teachers, activists, dissidents, people who were never seen again. The purpose wasn't just to arrest. It was to terrify the population, to create silence so deep that no one dared speak. That's why this matters. This isn't a break from democracy. It's what happens when a democracy is hollowed out, when fear replaces justice and power stops answering to the people. So if you're sitting with that sick feeling in your stomach asking what can be done, here's where we start. We tell the truth out loud. We use the language they avoid. Say phrases like state violence and political terror, not because it's dramatic, but because it's accurate. Share this story and others like it. We can't let this fall out of the news cycle. Mainstream media isn't reporting this, so we have to. Talk about what happened with your neighbors, coworkers, students, congregations. Support immigrant justice groups, especially those doing legal defense, housing, and rapid response. And we need to pressure our elected officials on the local, state, and federal level to denounce these raids publicly and end the funding streams that make them possible. And lastly, we need to document everything. We record and we bear witness. We refuse to get used to it, and we refuse to look away. This isn't just about immigrants, because these raids never stop with the people they claim to be targeting. They never do. The Palmer raids, Japanese internment, COINTELPRO, Jim Crow policing, and now Chicago. Different decades, same strategy. Fear, silence, control. History has judged every one of those chapters as shameful. Courage isn't optional anymore, not when people are being dragged from their homes in the dark. Because we don't get to say, we didn't know. We do know. And that means we have a choice. If this work helps you speak the truth, connect the dots, or find language for resistance, you can support it through the tip jar in my bio. Every share, every comment, every dollar, every word of encouragement matters, and it keeps this work going. And thank you for refusing to look away.